A billionaire laughed as he tossed $20 at his maid's son and challenged him to a game of chess. Everyone expected the boy to be humiliated, but 9 moves later, the room was silent. The billionaire was shaking, and a promise that started as a joke was about to cost him everything. He threw $20 at a maid's son like he was feeding a stray animal. 9 chess moves later, the billionaire was staring at a board that would cost him everything. The mansion glittered with crystal chandeliers and old money. Politicians, investors, and celebrity guests moved from room to room carrying glasses of champagne. At the center of the gathering sat an antique chess set carved from ivory and ebony near the doorway. The maid's teenage son paused and looked at it. The billionaire noticed immediately. "You like that?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The boy nodded with a smirk. The billionaire pulled a $20 bill from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. "Go buy yourself a toy chess set. This one is for people who can actually afford it." Laughter erupted. The maid's face turned red. She rushed forward and apologized, reaching for the money. But her son picked up the bill first, then he calmly placed it back on the table. "I already know how to play chess," he said. The room went silent. Several guests smirked, waiting for inevitable humiliation. The billionaire blinked, then laughed even harder. "Oh, this is perfect. Let's make tonight interesting." He leaned forward. "If you beat me, I'll give you $1 million. But if you lose, you and your mother walk out of this house and never come back." The maid looked horrified. The boy said nothing. He simply pulled out a chair and sat down. But nobody in that room knew that this quiet teenager had spent years preparing for a moment exactly like this. The guests stared at the teenager as though he had just volunteered to race a sports car on a bicycle. Of them knew where he came from. His mother had spent nearly 15 years cleaning homes that looked like palaces. She left before sunrise and often returned long after dark. Every extra dollar went toward rent, school supplies, and the small stack of books she kept. Beside her son's bed, they never had luxuries. What they had was determination. The boy grew up reading while other children chased expensive toys. One day he discovered an old library book about chess. Most of the pages were damaged, and several diagrams were faded. He read it anyway. Then he read it again. Whenever he could, he visited the public library and used the computers there. He watched recordings of famous matches, replayed legendary openings in his mind, and memorized strategies that seemed impossible for someone his age to understand. Many evenings, he waited for his mother to finish work inside the billionaire's mansion. From a distance, he watched wealthy men gather around the same antique chess set. He noticed everything. He noticed which guests panicked under pressure, which players rushed their decisions, and how the billionaire smiled whenever he believed his opponent, who had no chance whatsoever. The way they moved the pieces, the mistakes they repeated. The billionaire especially fascinated him. To the billionaire, chess wasn't merely a game. It was proof of superiority. He played to demonstrate that he was smarter than everyone around him. Now those same guests began whispering among themselves. A few even exchanged cash, betting on how quickly the teenager would lose. The maid looked from the table to her son and back again. Fear filled her face. She pulled him aside. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "If he gets angry, we'll lose everything." The boy looked at her gently. Then he smiled. "Sometimes people need to learn that money doesn't make them smarter." There was no anger in his voice, no arrogance. Just quiet certainty. Returned to the table and sat down as if he belonged there. The billionaire grinned at the sight. To him, this was going to be a few minutes of entertainment. To everyone else, it looked like the beginning of an embarrassing lesson. The game was about to begin. Everyone expected a quick lesson in humiliation. Instead, they were about to witness the first move in a disaster nobody could have predicted. The room seemed to shrink around the chess table. Guests abandoned their drinks and drifted closer, forming a circle around the billionaire and the maid's son. Most of them were smiling. A few looked almost excited. They expected a spectacle, the kind of humiliation wealthy people enjoyed when someone from outside their world forgot his place. The billionaire adjusted his cuffs and sat back comfortably. "Try to keep up," he said. Then he made his first move. The boy responded immediately. A second of hesitation. The billionaire smirked and played again. Big. The answer came instantly. A few guests chuckled. 3 moves later, the laughter continued, but it sounded different now. Less confident, more uncertain. The teenager's face remained calm. His breathing never changed. His eyes moved across the board with strange familiarity, as if he had already seen this game before. The billionaire made another move. Instant response. Another. Instant response. One guest frowned. "Why isn't he even thinking?" he whispered. No one answered. For the first time, the billionaire leaned forward in his chair. His smile faded slightly. He studied the board, then he played. The boy answered immediately. A long silence followed. The billionaire looked up, then back, down. Something wasn't right. The room felt different. A woman near the fireplace stopped smiling. Another guest quietly lowered his glass. Several people exchanged puzzled glances. The teenagers still looked perfectly relaxed. The billionaire suddenly remembered stories he had heard years earlier about young chess prodigies who could see patterns far beyond ordinary players. An uncomfortable thought entered his mind. What if this wasn't luck? He made his next move carefully again. The answer arrived instantly. Now the billionaire was no longer entertaining his guests. He was calculating by the seventh move. His confidence was gone. He stared at the board, then he looked at the boy, then back at the board. A thin line of sweat appeared on his forehead around them. Whispers began spreading. Something's happening. Look at his face. Can he actually lose? One of the guests quietly pulled out a phone. Then another. Nobody was laughing anymore. They were witnessing something they couldn't explain. The billionaire examined every piece. Again, that had to be a mistake. There had to be. He made the eighth move. The teenager looked at the board for less than a second, then he reached forward. The billionaire's eyes widened. A strange expression crossed his face. Fear. Room became completely silent. No glasses. CLINKED. No one moved. The boy's hand rested gently on one piece. He lifted it, placed it down, and leaned back in his chair. Ninth move. No celebration. No smile. Nothing. The billionaire froze. Every face in the room turned toward him. The teenager simply waited. And then the billionaire looked down at the pieces one more time, and his face turned pale. The billionaire didn't move. He stared at the board as though the pieces had suddenly changed shape. Then he leaned closer. His eyes darted from square to square. One escape route. Gone. Another. Gone. He checked again. Still gone. At last, he saw it. The boy had led him into a famous 9-move checkmate sequence, one so precise and unforgiving that every possible defense had disappeared before he even realized he was in danger. The billionaire swallowed hard. No, he whispered. He reached toward one piece, then stopped. He checked the board again. And again. The silence in the room became unbearable. Guests looked at each other. Nervously, they had gathered, expecting to watch a teenager get humiliated. Instead, they were watching one of the most powerful men they knew lose complete control. The billionaire traced the moves in his mind one final time. Nothing changed. The trap was perfect. A gray-haired guest who played chess competitively stepped forward. He studied the board for several long seconds, then he looked up. "It's over," he said quietly. "Checkmate." The room exploded. People gasped. Someone dropped a glass. Voices erupted from every corner. "No way. That can't be possible. He beat him." Phones were suddenly everywhere. Several guests were already recording. The maid covered her mouth with both hands. She looked at her son. Then at the board. Then back at her son. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. The boy she had raised with borrowed books and second-hand clothes had just defeated a billionaire in front of an entire room of wealthy, influential people. Meanwhile, the billionaire remained seated. Moments earlier, he had looked untouchable. Now he looked small. The confidence in his eyes was gone. The smile was gone. Even his posture had changed. For the first time that evening, he seemed like an ordinary man who had just discovered that money could not buy intelligence, preparation, or composure. The teenager slowly stood. Everyone expected him to celebrate. To laugh. To enjoy the humiliation. He did none of those things. He simply looked at the billionaire and gave a polite nod. "Thank you for the game," he said. Words somehow made the defeat even heavier. Again, silence filled the room. Every eye turned toward the billionaire. No one cared about the chessboard anymore. They wanted to know one thing. Would he honor the wager? The billionaire looked at the boy. Then at the $1,000,000 promise he had made so casually. But losing the chess match turned out to be the least expensive part of that night. For nearly a minute, the billionaire said nothing. Then, under the gaze of every person in the room, he reached for his checkbook. His hand trembled. The same man who had tossed $20 across the table now slowly wrote a check for $1 million. Nobody applauded. Nobody congratulated. To him, their attention had already shifted. They were looking at the teenager. Guests approached the boy one by one. Some wanted to shake his hand. Others wanted to know where he had learned to play. A few simply stared at him with disbelief. Even the gray-haired chess player who had declared the checkmate stood beside him and smiled. He told the guests that he had spent 40 years studying the game and had rarely seen someone execute that sequence with such precision. The compliments spread through the room like another shockwave of disbelief. Meanwhile, the billionaire remained alone at the table. By morning, videos from the mansion had spread everywhere. People weren't talking about the money. They were talking about the insult. The checkmate. The boy's calm response. Millions of viewers praised his humility and condemned the billionaire's arrogance. The story traveled far beyond that mansion and became a reminder that talent can emerge from places society often ignores. The consequences arrived quietly. Business associates stopped calling as often. Invitations became less frequent. People who once admired the billionaire now questioned his character. He slowly realized the truth. He had not simply lost a chess game. He had lost something far more valuable. Respect. Influence. carefully crafted image that made him feel superior to everyone around him. As for the boy, he used the money to secure a better home for his mother and continue his education, yet nothing about him seemed different. He remained soft-spoken, grateful, determined. When people asked him how it felt to become a millionaire overnight, he smiled and gave a simple answer. I was already rich. I had my mother and I had my books. That night wasn't really about chess. It was about a man who believed wealth made him untouchable and a boy who proved that intelligence, discipline, and dignity cannot be bought. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room isn't the richest one, it's the quiet person everyone decided to underestimate.